Today we actually heard from David Beckham. He was on CNBC this morning, and while he didn't address this controversy specifically, he was asked about social media and children's use of social media. So here's what he said.
They make mistakes. Children are allowed to make mistakes. That's how they learn. So that's what I try to teach my kids. But you have to sometimes let them make those mistakes.
He basically talks about the fact that he is not the one being controlled by his wife. His family were controlling.
It was supposed to be just another calm interview. Just another polished, media-trained moment from the king of composure himself, David Beckham. But then, he said that. No names. No direct accusations. No dramatic outburst. And somehow, it got ugly. Because when David started talking about mistakes, discipline, and earning respect, the internet heard something else entirely. Was that subtle shade? Was that a silent warning? Or was that a father finally drawing a line in the sand? Meanwhile, Brooklyn Beckham is out here preaching independence, freedom, and building his own path. But here's the real question nobody wants to say out loud. If you're truly independent, why does it still look like you're standing on someone else's empire? The smiles are polished. The captions are supportive. The family posts are picture perfect. But behind those glossy headlines, something shifted. And when silence speaks louder than words, you know it's serious. So what really happened inside the Beckham dynasty? Let's talk about it. The thing about silence is, it only works when you've already proven yourself. And that's exactly why when David Beckham speaks softly, the world leans in. Because this isn't just any retired football legend casually offering parenting advice. This is a man who rebuilt his career after being booed by an entire nation. A man who turned criticism into championships. A man who knows exactly what pressure feels like. So when he calmly says, "Kids make mistakes, you have to let them make mistakes," it doesn't land as casual. It lands heavy. Because timing matters. And this didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened right after whispers started growing louder. Right after headlines began questioning whether Brooklyn Beckham was truly building something of his own, or just floating from one spotlight to the next. Football, photography, cooking, hot sauce branding. Each chapter entered with fireworks. Each one faded quietly. And the internet noticed. Now let's be clear, trying different paths isn't a crime. Reinventing yourself isn't weakness. But when every reinvention looks like a rebrand instead of a rebuild, that's when people start asking uncomfortable questions. Because here's the unspoken rule of legacy families. Opportunity is expected. Results are demanded. Brooklyn didn't grow up in the shadows. He grew up in stadium lights, elite academies, fashion weeks, front rows, access that most aspiring creatives would sell their sleep for. And yet, somehow, none of it has stuck. Not long enough. Not hard enough. And in a world obsessed with hustle culture, quitting halfway through feels louder than failure. Meanwhile, the Beckham machine keeps moving. Romeo Beckham quietly stacking fashion campaigns. Cruz Beckham building momentum in music. No dramatic interviews. No cryptic statements. Just consistent output. And that contrast? It's impossible to ignore. The public doesn't compare Brooklyn to average 20-somethings. They compare him to his father. And that's a brutal standard. Because David didn't inherit applause. He fought for it. Lost it. Earned it back. Over and over. So when Brooklyn talks about wanting distance, wanting freedom, wanting to step away from control, some fans hear independence. Others hear avoidance. And that's where things get complicated. Because in interviews, Brooklyn radiates confidence. He talks about love, about support, about building a life with Nicola Peltz. He credits her for grounding him, for helping him grow, for giving him clarity. And there's nothing wrong with that. But the internet never stops at surface level. It starts calculating. If your identity shifts every few years, if your projects launch with hype but stall without follow-through, if your public image leans heavily on your marriage, then what exactly is the foundation? That question isn't cruel. It's inevitable. Because the Beckham name carries weight. And weight creates expectation. Now let's talk about that birthday. A milestone celebration. 50 years of legacy. A room filled with power players, A-listers, lifelong friends. Cameras flashing. Headlines ready. And two names noticeably absent.
I saw an interview with David. This was like right after Brooklyn released his statement. And he's like, kids make mistakes and you have to let them make mistakes. And it was like a very grounded answer. I was like, he and Victoria though they may have issues, no family's perfect, are grounded adults.
Brooklyn. Nicola. No public drama. No shouting matches. No statements. Just absence. And absence, in celebrity culture, screams. Fans dissected every detail. Was it scheduling? Was it tension? Was it coincidence? Or was it distance becoming something more permanent? Again, no proof of war. No confirmed feud. But perception doesn't wait for confirmation. It builds narratives. And narratives move faster than facts. Meanwhile, David stays composed, smiling at events, supporting his younger sons, posting proud father moments without controversy attached. It's strategic, because silence can either be defensive or confident. And in this case, it feels confident. Like a man who doesn't need to argue publicly because he trusts time to reveal the truth. But here's the twist nobody expected. Brooklyn's frustration didn't explode in anger. It surfaced in tone. Subtle jabs about control, about narrative, about wanting autonomy. Not explosive accusations, but enough to spark speculation. And suddenly, the story wasn't about football anymore. It wasn't about photography, or cooking, or branding. It became about values. Legacy versus lifestyle. Discipline versus comfort. Earning vs inheriting. That's the real tension. Not some soap opera betrayal. A philosophical clash. Because David represents an era where failure meant humiliation, and the only response was harder work. Brooklyn represents an era where reinvention is normal, where pivoting is praised, where identity is fluid. 2 generations. 2 definitions of success. And somewhere in between, a family trying to stay united under a microscope. The truth is, Brooklyn still has time. He's not finished. He's not doomed. He's not talentless. But time feels shorter when expectations are taller. And the public? They are watching closely now. Not for the next launch. Not for the next announcement. But for consistency. For staying power. For proof that this isn't just another rebrand cycle. Because here's the uncomfortable reality. Privilege opens doors. But it doesn't protect reputation forever. Eventually, the work has to stand alone. And until that happens, every interview from David will be analyzed like coded language. Every absence will spark speculation. Every new Brooklyn project will be met with one silent question. Is this the one that lasts? And that's where things truly get tense. Not in shouting matches. Not in dramatic exposés. But in the quiet space between expectation and execution. And right now, that space is louder than ever.
Recently, David Beckham had a 50th birthday party that was a star-studded event, and Brooklyn and Nicola were not there. Allegedly, David Beckham also planned an all-boys fishing trip for his 50th birthday, and Brooklyn Beckham declined. So is Brooklyn choosing to distance himself from the Beckham name and just move on with his new life and new wife?
And here's where the temperature really starts to rise. Because once the internet locks onto a narrative, it doesn't just watch, it investigates. Every clip gets replayed. Every caption gets decoded. Every family appearance becomes evidence in a trial that no one officially announced, but everyone is participating in. After David's carefully worded comments about mistakes and learning the hard way, social media didn't hear parenting advice. They heard a message. Not loud, not direct, but pointed. And suddenly, the spotlight shifted back onto Brooklyn Beckham. Not as the golden child, not as the newlywed romantic, not as the experimental entrepreneur, but as the question mark. Because let's talk about patterns. The football chapter? It had legacy written all over it. The son of David Beckham stepping onto the pitch felt poetic. Cameras loved it. Headlines framed it as destiny. But destiny demands discipline. And when the youth contracts didn't evolve into something bigger, the dream quietly dissolved. Then came photography. Glossy shoots. A high-profile photo book. Big brand collaborations. The rollout was polished. The access? Elite. But critics weren't gentle. They questioned the craft, the perspective, the experience. And once again, the momentum slowed. Then cooking entered the chat. Suddenly, Brooklyn wasn't just experimenting. He was hosting online cooking segments, partnering with platforms, presenting dishes with cinematic lighting and designer aprons. The internet exploded. Not because of Michelin-level innovation, but because of the contrast. Zero formal training. Massive exposure. And that's when the phrase Nepo baby stopped being a meme and started being a headline. Now, is it illegal to have famous parents? Of course not. But in 2026, public perception is brutal. Audiences crave authenticity. They reward grind stories. They celebrate struggle to success arcs. And when someone appears to skip chapters, the applause turns into side-eye. Meanwhile, in the same digital arena, Romeo Beckham is clocking runway appearances without dramatic declarations of independence. He shows up, walks, repeats. Cruz Beckham is steadily leaning into music, writing, performing, refining. No flashy reinventions. No identity pivots every 18 months. Just repetition. And repetition builds credibility. That contrast is where the tension sharpens. Because the public doesn't just compare siblings, they measure consistency. Then there's the marriage dynamic. Brooklyn openly praises Nicola Peltz. He credits her for clarity, strength, growth. In interviews, his loyalty is unmistakable. And loyalty is admirable. But critics ask a different question. Where does partnership end and dependency begin? Online forums buzzed with speculation. Comment sections filled with armchair analysts dissecting body language, event attendance, seating charts at Fashion Week. Was Brooklyn drifting away from the Beckham nucleus? Or simply carving out a married identity separate from his parents' empire? Because here's the uncomfortable reality. When you're born into one of the most recognizable surnames on the planet, distance feels dramatic, even if it's normal. But then came the birthday absence. A 50th celebration for David. A milestone dripping with symbolism. A moment tailor-made for family unity optics. And Brooklyn wasn't there. No scandal. No screaming headlines from the family itself, just absence. And absence, in celebrity culture, is a statement, even when it isn't intended to be one. Fans split into camps. Team is building his own life. Team something's definitely off. And as speculation swirled, David did something fascinating. Nothing. No defensive interviews. No clarifying Instagram captions. No family is everything declarations. Just composure. And that composure read differently depending on who was watching. Some saw strength. Others saw strategy. Because David understands optics. His navigated scandals, tabloid storms, career-threatening moments. He knows when to speak, and more importantly, when not to. So when he talks about accountability and earning respect without directly referencing Brooklyn, it feels surgical. Not explosive. Precise. And here's where the story shifts from family gossip to philosophical standoff. Brooklyn talks about independence. David embodies earned authority. One says, "Let me figure it out my way." The other built an empire on relentless repetition. Two definitions of success colliding under one surname. And the public? They are not neutral observers. They project their own frustrations onto this story. To some, Brooklyn represents privilege unchecked. To others, he's a young man suffocated by impossible expectations. But what makes it messy, what makes it ugly, is perception. Because perception doesn't wait for nuance. It magnifies contrast. It frames silence as shade. It frames absence as tension. It frames reinvention as instability. And suddenly, every Brooklyn move feels like it carries double weight. Launch a new product? Is this another short phase? Post a romantic tribute? Is he overcompensating? Skip a family event? Confirmed feud. The microscope never turns off. And here's the twist no one talks about. Maybe the real battle isn't between father and son. Maybe it's between expectation and evolution. David came from an era where you endured criticism in silence and responded with results. Brooklyn lives in an era where self-expression is currency and pivoting is normal. But legacy families don't get generational resets easily. The standard stays fixed. And that fixed standard is brutal. Because when your father's career is studied in documentaries and business schools, average effort doesn't land softly. It echoes. And that echo is what we're hearing now. Not a screaming match. Not a legal war. But a quiet recalibration. Brooklyn standing at a crossroads. David standing firm in principle. And the world watching like it's the final minutes of a championship match, waiting to see if this is the comeback story. Or just another rebrand. And the truth? The next move matters more than ever. Because once the public narrative crystallizes, it's nearly impossible to rewrite. And right now, the narrative is hanging in the balance. And now we arrive at the part nobody wants to say out loud. Because tension inside powerful families doesn't explode overnight. It simmers. It lingers in body language. In who stands next to who at events. In who gets tagged. And who doesn't. And when the surname is Beckham, every detail becomes a headline waiting to happen. At this point, this isn't about one interview clip anymore. It's about momentum, direction, identity. Because here's the brutal reality. The world isn't asking whether Brooklyn Beckham is talented. They're asking whether he's consistent. And consistency is the one currency you can't inherit. For decades, David Beckham built his brand on repetition. Training sessions before sunrise. Matches under impossible pressure. Comebacks after public humiliation. He didn't just win trophies, he survived storms. That survival instinct became his blueprint. So when he talks about owning mistakes and learning the hard way, it's not philosophy. It's autobiography. And that's why the contrast feels so sharp. Brooklyn's story, so far, feels like chapters that start strong but end abruptly. And in the digital age, attention spans are short, but reputations are long. Every unfinished chapter becomes part of the narrative. Football didn't fully bloom. Photography sparked debate. Cooking drew side eyes. Branding raised eyebrows. Individually, none of these are scandals. Together, they form a pattern critics can't ignore. And the internet loves patterns. Now add marriage to the mix. Brooklyn has publicly declared his devotion to Nicola Peltz in a way that's unwavering. Interviews, captions, red carpets, his loyalty is loud. But here's the question floating around comment sections: is he building a life or anchoring his identity? Because when public appearances increasingly center around one dynamic, speculation multiplies. Not because love is controversial, but because independence was the original headline. And independence is difficult to measure when every professional pivot feels intertwined with the same support system. Again, this isn't accusation, it's perception. And perception, in celebrity culture, is everything. Meanwhile, the Beckham machine remains polished. Romeo Beckham continues stacking runway credibility. Cruz Beckham steadily shapes a musical identity. Their progress isn't explosive. It's incremental. And incremental progress doesn't trend. But it builds quietly. That's the difference. One path is loud and constantly shifting. The other is repetitive and stable. And stability wins long term. Now let's talk about pressure. Because being David Beckham's son isn't like being anyone else's son. It's inheriting a global brand. A standard forged in stadiums. A reputation sharpened by decades of scrutiny. The public doesn't compare Brooklyn to peers his age. They compare him to a man who rebuilt his image multiple times under international humiliation and came back stronger. That's not fair. But it's reality. And reality doesn't grade on a curve. So what happens next? That's the question simmering beneath all the speculation. Does Brooklyn double down on one craft and grind quietly until respect catches up? Or does he pivot again, risking another narrative cycle of here we go again? Because here's the truth, the next move defines the story. Not the interview. Not the absence at events. Not the online debates. The next sustained effort. If he commits, truly commits, and stays through the criticism, through the memes, through the skepticism, the narrative shifts. People love a comeback. They worship reinvention when it's backed by resilience. But if another chapter starts with hype and fades into silence, the Nepo baby label hardens. And labels, once cemented, are brutal to crack. As for David, his silence remains the loudest voice in the room. No defensive father rants. No public scolding. Just composure. And composure from a man who understands media cycles is rarely accidental. It signals patience. It signals confidence. It signals, time will tell. But time isn't neutral. Time magnifies outcomes. It rewards discipline. It exposes inconsistency. And right now, time is ticking loudly around the Beckham narrative. Because the internet doesn't forget. It archives. Every announcement. Every pivot. Every quote about freedom and independence. All stored. All waiting to be compared against results. This isn't a family war. It's a crossroads. Legacy versus lifestyle. Comfort versus grind. Short-term applause vs long-term respect. And here's the twist that makes it truly ugly. No one inside that family is publicly attacking each other. The tension exists in contrast. In philosophy. In expectation. And that kind of tension is harder to fix than a shouting match. Because you can apologize for words. You can't apologize for patterns. Brooklyn still has the advantage most dreamers would kill for. Access. Visibility. Resources. But advantage without endurance is temporary. And endurance is the one trait that can't be inherited through DNA. It's built in repetition. In boring days. In unglamorous hours. in showing up when no one is clapping. That's the test. And whether Brooklyn passes it or not will define the next decade of his story. Not because the public demands perfection, but because the surname demands effort. And that's the uncomfortable reality. Being a Beckham isn't just about privilege. It's about expectation. So now the world waits. Not for another interview. Not for another aesthetic launch. But for proof. Proof that independence isn't just distance. Proof that reinvention isn't avoidance. Proof that respect is being earned, not assumed. Because until that proof appears, the silence from David will continue to echo. Steady, unbothered, unmoved. And in that silence lies the real pressure. Not anger, not drama. Pressure. The kind that either forges something solid, or exposes what was never fully built in the first place. And that's why this story isn't over. It's just entering its most defining chapter. So now the question isn't what happened. The real question is, what happens next? Because this isn't just another celebrity headline that fades in 48 hours. This is legacy on the line. This is pressure meeting privilege in real time. This is a global last name being tested under a digital microscope. Is Brooklyn Beckham misunderstood? A young creative experimenting in public while the world demands perfection? Or is this exactly what critics have been saying all along? Opportunity without endurance? And what about David Beckham? Was that calm interview just fatherly wisdom or a masterclass in subtle accountability? Because let's be honest, silence can protect you, but it can also expose you. Right now, the narrative is split down the middle. Some see growth, others see drift. Some see independence, others see comfort disguised as courage. So I want to know where you stand. Is Brooklyn building his own empire quietly, or still standing safely inside one that was already built for him? Drop your honest take in the comments. No filters, no safe answers. And if you want more deep dives into the stories hiding behind polished red carpets and perfect Instagram captions, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because when legacy gets tested, it rarely stays quiet for long.